You were told the Great Chronometer of Aeridor was the wonder of the age, a monument to precision, a gift that unified a city under the banner of perfect objective time. That was the public inscription. The truth was inscribed in the clock's hidden gears. The chronometer didn't just tell time, it gathered it, it fed on it, and the price of its perfect rhythm was a fraction of a second stolen from every heartbeat in the city below. Before we ascend this tower, know this. This channel is not a history lesson. It is a look at the mechanism. We show you the gears of power that turn just behind the beautiful face of the world. If you are comfortable with the time you have been given, do not proceed. But if you have ever felt that your days are slipping away faster than they should, then subscribe. Show us you are ready to see the clockwork. This was not engineering. It was temporal vampirism on an industrial scale. The creation of a perfect, perpetual machine powered by the slow, imperceptible theft of human life, disguised as the ultimate civic gift. Our story begins in the city of Aeridor, 1891, the capital of an empire obsessed with efficiency, a city where punctuality was not just a virtue, it was a religion. To solidify their place as the most modern city in the world, the city fathers commissioned the greatest horologist of the era to build a clock tower that would be the heartbeat of the nation. They gave him a mountain of gold and a single, simple mandate: create a timepiece so perfect, so accurate, that it would never lose a single second. The horologist they hired was a recluse, a genius who saw human life as a messy, chaotic, and imprecise affair. He promised them a clock that would not just measure time, but master it. He built them a god of gears and brass, and he knew that for a god to live forever, its followers must always provide a sacrifice. The horologist's name was Elias Thorn. He arrived in Aeridor not with a team of assistants, but alone, his worldly possessions contained in a dozen identical brass-bound trunks. He was a man who seemed to be carved from ivory and stillness. His movements were spare and precise, his face a pale, unlined mask that betrayed no emotion. He spoke only when necessary, his voice a dry, soft whisper, as if he begrudged the time it took to form the words. He did not look at a man's face when he spoke. He watched the tiny, rhythmic pulse in his throat, his eyes, the pale gray of a winter sky, seeming to measure its imperfections. The city fathers gave him the central spire of the grand municipal hall. For 2 years, the tower was sealed, shrouded in canvas and silence. The only sounds from within were the faint, high-pitched ringing of stressed metal and the slow, rhythmic grinding of immense stones being polished. Thorn employed no local craftsmen. His tools and materials, all brought with him in the brass-bound trunks, were a mystery. He worked with gears of a strange, non-tarnishing alloy, with massive, resonating quartz crystals harvested from caves deep beneath the earth, and with miles of fine, silver wiring that seemed to hum with a life of its own. At the heart of the mechanism was what he called the pendulum of stillness. It was not a swinging pendulum in the traditional sense. It was a massive, perfectly balanced weight of polished obsidian, suspended in a vacuum-sealed glass chamber from a single, impossibly thin wire. It did not swing, it vibrated. It moved with a slow, majestic sweep that was almost imperceptible to the naked eye, and it seemed to hang for an impossibly long time at the apex of its arc, as if it were drinking in the moment before releasing it. Councilman Valerius, the head of the city fathers and a man whose ambition was as precise as Thorn's engineering, was the only one granted access to the tower during its construction. He was a man who saw the city as a grand, inefficient machine that he was destined to perfect. He saw in Thorn a fellow spirit. "You promised us perfection, Master Thorn," Valerius said one day, standing before the silent, gleaming mechanism. "Absolute perfection. Is it possible?" Thorn turned his pale eyes from the pendulum to Valerius. "Perfection is possible," he whispered, his voice dry as dust. "But a perfect clock cannot be a closed system. It cannot tell time in a vacuum. It must be anchored to the temporal flow of the world around it. To maintain its perfect, unwavering rhythm, it must draw stability from the resonant frequencies of its environment. Think of it as a tax. A resonance tax paid by every other clock, every other heartbeat, that is not in perfect harmony with it. A small, imperceptible price for perfect, imperial order." Valerius understood. He did not care about the poetics. He cared about the result. "An imperceptible price," he repeated, the words tasting of power. "So be it." The day the chronometer was activated was a national holiday. A vast crowd gathered in the grand square. Below at precisely noon, a deep, resonant bong echoed through the city. It was not a cheerful chime. It was a sound of profound, soul-shaking depth, a note that seemed to settle over Aeridor like a vast, invisible blanket. Then came the tick-tock. It was not a sound one heard with the ears, it was a feeling, a slow, steady, rhythmic pressure that seemed to emanate from the tower, a pulse that every citizen could feel in their bones, in the fillings of their teeth. The city of Aeridor had a new heartbeat. And it was perfect. The effect was subtle at first, a creeping, citywide malaise that no one could name. The citizens of Aeridor became, as a whole, more punctual, more efficient. The trains ran with a new, startling precision. Factory shifts ended not on the minute, but on the second. But a price was being paid in the currency of the human spirit. People began to feel a strange sense of temporal anxiety, a feeling of being perpetually behind, of their days slipping away just a little too fast. A mother would look at her child and feel a pang of sorrow, as if a week had passed in a day. A craftsman would find himself rushing his work, his hands moving with a frantic urgency he couldn't explain. Life in Aeridor, once a brisk but manageable river, had become a torrent, and everyone was struggling to keep their heads above water. The only person who began to see the pattern was a young, disgraced physicist named Alasdair Finch. He had been dismissed from the Imperial University for his radical theories on temporal mechanics and harmonic resonance. He believed that time was not a constant, but a fluid, and that powerful resonant frequencies could create temporal eddies, areas where time itself could be compressed or dilated. When the Great Chronometer was activated, he felt its deep, resonant pulse not as a marvel of engineering, but as a hostile, invasive force. He began his investigation with a simple, brilliant experiment. He placed a dozen of the most accurate, state-of-the-art pendulum clocks in different locations around the city. Within a week, he discovered a terrifying anomaly. Every single clock was running fast, not by much, a fraction of a second a day, but it was a consistent, citywide phenomenon. It was as if a giant, invisible hand were giving every pendulum in the city a tiny, imperceptible push, forcing it to speed up. He then turned his attention to human biology. He set up a small, secret clinic in the city's poorest district, offering free medical checkups. He used a new, highly sensitive instrument of his own design, a cardiosonograph, to measure the heartbeats of his patients. He found the same impossible pattern. The average resting heart rate of a citizen of Aeridor was now 2 to 3 beats per minute faster than the established human norm. The effect was more pronounced in those who lived and worked closer to the tower. The Great Chronometer was not just making the city's clocks run faster, it was making its people's hearts beat faster. It was stealing their time, one tiny, stolen heartbeat at a time. His journal, filled with frantic calculations and terrifying conclusions, became the secret record of this temporal theft. November 12, 1891. The data is irrefutable. The chronometer is a massive harmonic resonator. Its pendulum does not merely measure time, Meanwhile, in the silent, sealed chamber at the top of the tower, Elias Thorne watched his creation with a serene, godlike satisfaction. He had a single, exquisitely sensitive instrument connected to the chronometer's core mechanism. It was not a clock. It was a gauge, and it measured what he called the temporal tithe, the cumulative amount of time his machine had harvested from the city. The needle on the gauge crept upwards, a slow, steady, and beautiful line, the perfect graph of a perfect theft. He was not just a horologist. He was the wealthiest man in the world, his currency not gold, but stolen moments, harvested heartbeats, and the borrowed time of 1,000,000 unsuspecting souls. Alasdair Finch knew he could not present his findings to the city fathers. They were the architects of the system. He needed an ally, someone with the power to act and the courage to believe an impossible truth. He found one in the most unlikely of places, the city's opera house. He sought out a woman known only as Madame Valère, the opera's prima donna. She was not just a singer, she was a phenomenon. Her fame rested on her legendary breath control, her ability to hold a single, perfect note for an impossibly long time. But since the chronometer's activation, her gift had begun to fail her. She found herself gasping for breath, her legendary sustained notes cut short by a frantic, internal clock she couldn't control. She felt as if her own lungs were betraying her. Finch gained an audience with her, not as a physicist, but as a specialist in respiratory harmonics. He didn't speak of stolen time. He spoke of resonant frequencies. Madame. He explained, your body is a perfect instrument, but a new dominant instrument has been introduced into the city's orchestra. The chronometer, its pulse, its rhythm, is so powerful, it is forcing every other instrument to play in its time. It is forcing your lungs, your heart, to follow its relentless mechanical beat. You are not losing your breath. It is being taken from you. Valère, a woman of instinct and art, understood this language. She had felt it in her own body. the feeling of being rushed, of her own natural rhythm being violated by an external tyrannical beat. She had access to the city's elite, to the drawing rooms and salons where men like Councilman Valerius spoke more freely. She agreed to become Finch's eyes and ears. The final piece of the puzzle, the truth of the chronometer's ultimate purpose, was revealed through her. At a private gala, she overheard a drunken conversation between Valerius and a visiting munitions industrialist. The industrialist was praising the city's newfound efficiency. Valerius, his tongue loosened by champagne, boasted of its source. "It is Thorne's great work," he slurred, a proud, cruel smile on his lips. "He has gifted us with more than a clock. He has gifted us with a more productive populace, a workforce that moves with the certainty of a machine, and soon we will have an army that marches to a single, perfect beat." He went on to describe the next phase. The temporal tithe, the stolen time harvested by the clock, was not just dissipating, it was being stored, concentrated in the massive quartz crystals at the heart of the mechanism. Thorne had discovered a way to release this stored temporal energy in a single, focused burst. He was creating a weapon, a chronal bomb that, when detonated, would not destroy a city with fire, but with time. It would instantly age everything within a mile radius by 50 years. Metal would rust to dust, stone would crumble, and human beings would wither into mummified husks in the blink of an eye. The Great Chronometer was not just a parasite. It was an hourglass waiting to be turned over. This is the turning point, the moment a slow, insidious horror reveals itself to be the prelude to an unimaginable apocalypse. If you understand the chilling escalation, the perfection of a system of control into a weapon of total annihilation, then make your presence known. This is a story for those who see the endgame. Hit the like button. Subscribe. The final countdown has begun. Valère brought this terrifying news to Finch. The physicist felt a cold dread that eclipsed all his previous findings. The theft of heartbeats was a prelude to the theft of lifetimes. He looked at his calculations at the rate of the temporal tithe. He realized with a sickening certainty that the chronometer would be fully charged in less than a week. The weapon was almost ready. Finch knew he could not destroy the clock. The tower was a fortress, but he was a physicist. He knew that every resonant system has a point of catastrophic failure. The chronometer maintained its perfect rhythm by imposing it on everything else. But what if, he reasoned, he could introduce a rhythm so powerful, so chaotic, that the chronometer could not absorb it? What if he could fight the city's perfect, monolithic heartbeat with a million tiny, disorganized human ones? His plan was insane, brilliant, and hinged entirely on the one person in the city whose own rhythm was her greatest weapon, Madame Valère. The plan was an act of harmonic warfare, a symphony of rebellion. Finch's target was not the clock's mechanism, but its anchor, the temporal field of the city itself. He needed to create a sonic counterpulse, a wave of such chaotic human energy that it would overwhelm the chronometer's ability to stabilize itself. The stage was set for the opening night of the new opera season, an event attended by every powerful figure in Aeridor, including Councilman Valerius and Elias Thorne himself, who was being honored for his great work. Madame Valère was scheduled to perform her most famous aria, a piece known for its soaring, sustained notes. This would be their moment. Finch worked frantically, modifying the opera house's new, experimental public address system. He didn't just want to amplify Valère's voice. He wanted to broadcast its most essential human quality, the subtle, natural, and imperfect fluctuations of her heartbeat and her breath, which he could now monitor with his own sensitive instruments. As the gala began, Valère prepared in her dressing room. Finch attached a small, discreet cardiosonograph sensor to her wrist. "Sing not for perfection, madame," he whispered, his voice filled with a desperate urgency. "Sing with your blood, let them hear your heart, let the clock feel it." The first act proceeded as planned. Then, the moment came for Valère's aria. She walked onto the stage, the entire city's elite watching in hushed anticipation. The orchestra began. She took a breath, and she began to sing. But this time it was different. Finch, from a hidden control booth, activated his modified system. Amplified and broadcast throughout the entire opera house, woven into the fabric of her voice, was a new sound, the soft, powerful, rhythmic thump-thump of her own heart. The effect was mesmerizing. The audience felt the music not just in their ears, but as a visceral, living pulse. And then, at the aria's climax, Valère did something extraordinary. Instead of delivering her famous, single, perfectly sustained note, she allowed the flaw she had been fighting for months to take over. Her note wavered, trembled, filled with the vibrato of human breath, the slight, natural arrhythmia of a living heart. She poured all her fear, her defiance, and her humanity into that one, beautifully imperfect sound. In the tower high above the city, the chronometer felt this harmonic rebellion as a physical blow. For the first time, it was confronted with a resonant frequency that was not just powerful, but chaotic, alive, and utterly, defiantly human. The perfectly still pendulum began to shudder. This was Finch's cue. The broadcast of Valaire's heartbeat was not just confined to the opera house. He had jury-rigged a connection to the city's emergency bell system. As Valaire held her flawed human note, Finch threw a switch. Her amplified heartbeat, the sound of a single, defiant human soul, began to broadcast from every bell tower in the city. A great, rhythmic, living pulse washed over Aeridor, a sound that was the antithesis of the chronometer's cold, mechanical tick-tock. The people in the streets, hearing this strange, powerful heartbeat echoing through the city, felt a stirring in their own chests. Their own hearts, for so long suppressed by the clock's rhythm, began to respond, to flutter, to try and break free. For a few precious moments, the city of Aeridor had a million different heartbeats, all pushing back against the one. The Great Chronometer, overwhelmed by this tidal wave of temporal chaos, could not stabilize itself. The massive quartz crystals, now overloaded with stolen time and unable to find a stable resonant frequency, began to glow with a furious violet light. The pendulum of stillness began to swing, wildly and erratically. High in the tower, Elias Thorne watched, his mask of calm finally shattering, as the needle on his temporal tithe gauge spun backwards, erasing his stolen fortune in a matter of seconds. The clock began to chime, not with its deep, resonant bong, but with a series of frantic, shrieking bells like a dying titan. Then, with a final, grinding groan of tortured metal, the mechanism seized. The great hands on the clock face stuttered, stopped, and then slowly began to drift. A profound silence fell over Aeridor. The oppressive, citywide pulse was gone. For the first time in 2 years, the city could breathe. The silence was a revelation. For 2 years, the citizens of Aeridor had lived under a low-grade, constant temporal pressure they had mistaken for the pace of modern life. Its sudden absence was a physical release. A collective, unconscious sigh went through the city. People stopped in the streets, looking up at the dead face of the clock, feeling a strange, forgotten sense of calm. The frantic, internal rushing was gone. They had their time back. In the opera house, the chaos was contained but absolute. Councilman Valerius, seeing the weapon he had bankrolled and the legacy he had built literally grind to a halt, suffered a stroke on the spot, his own heart finally rebelling. Elias Thorne vanished. In the confusion following the clock's failure, he slipped away from the panicked crowd, a ghost leaving his own mausoleum. He was never seen again. Alastair Finch and Madame Valaire became heroes of a revolution no one understood. The official inquiry, led by a new council terrified of the truth, concocted a plausible story. The Great Chronometer, they declared, had suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure due to a flaw in its resonant harmonics, a story that was technically true but utterly devoid of the horrifying context. Finch's assistance was praised as a brilliant diagnostic feat, and Valaire's performance was lauded as a moment of artistic passion, so profound it had inadvertently triggered the collapse. They were celebrated for averting a disaster, while the nature of the disaster itself was sealed and buried. The chronometer was never repaired. The secrets of its mechanism were too complex, and for the few who now knew the truth, too terrifying to contemplate. The tower was sealed, becoming a silent, dead monument at the heart of the city, a constant, ominous reminder of a perfection that had nearly cost them everything. But the story does not end with a silent clock. The temporal tithe that had been stored in the quartz crystals did not simply vanish when the machine broke. It was released back into T. He city, but not evenly. It saturated the area around the tower in a chaotic, unpredictable temporal field. For decades afterwards, strange occurrences were reported. A man would walk down a street and age a year. A child's toy left on a windowsill would be covered in the dust of a decade by morning. Time in the heart of Aeridor had become sticky, a place of eddies and whirlpools, a permanent scar left by Thorne's monstrous machine. And the science itself was not lost. Alastair Finch, though publicly celebrated, was now privately feared. He was placed under a quiet, permanent state surveillance, his research into temporal mechanics classified at the highest level of national security. They knew what he knew, and they understood that the principle behind the chronometer, the harvesting of time itself, was the ultimate form of power. Elias Thorne, the horologist, became a legend, a cautionary tale. But his notes, his theories, and the duplicate schematics for his etheric heart equivalent were not in the tower when it was sealed. They had been sent, years before, to his silent investors, the munitions industrialists who had seen the weapon's true potential. The dream of a chronal bomb, a weapon that could turn an enemy army to dust in an instant, was too powerful to abandon. Somewhere else in a new, secret workshop, a new clock was already being built. The experiment in Aeridor had not been a failure. It had been a successful, full-scale field test. The Great Chronometer of Aeridor was not a monument to time. It was the first great engine of its theft. It stands as a silent testament to a chilling, fundamental principle that your life, measured in moments and heartbeats, is the ultimate raw material, a resource to be harvested, concentrated, and weaponized by powers who have learned to operate on a scale you can barely comprehend. Elias Thorne was not a simple madman. He was a prophet of a new kind of physics, a physics of control. He proved that you don't need to rule a person's mind if you can simply own the clock by which they live. By controlling the rhythm of a city, you control the rhythm of its souls. The temporal anxiety, the feeling of being rushed, the sense that the days are too short, this was not a side effect. It was the desired outcome. A population kept off balance, perpetually behind, is a population too exhausted to rebel. Do not think this is a fable of steam and brass. Thorne's machine was simply the prototype. The system has been perfected. It is now silent, invisible, and global. The Great Chronometer is the 24-hour news cycle, the quarterly earnings report, the relentless, ever-accelerating pace of a world that tells you that to be still is to fall behind. The temporal tithe is the collective tax on your attention, the constant, low-grade theft of your time through endless notifications, meaningless deadlines, and the manufactured urgency of 1,000 trivialities. You are being rushed. You are being drained. Not by a single, monolithic clock tower, but by a million tiny, invisible ones, all demanding their fraction of your life. The chronal bomb is no longer a fantastical weapon. It is the quiet reality of a life spent in a state of perpetual distraction, a life that, when you finally look back on it, seems to have vanished in a flash, leaving you withered, wondering where all the years went. Now you must make a choice. Will you continue to march to their rhythm, or will you reclaim your own heartbeat? In the comments below, it is time to stop their clock, to make a declaration of temporal independence. State it twice. My time is my own. My time is my own. This is your first act of rebellion, a conscious decision to step outside their imposed rhythm. If you are ready to continue this work, to identify the invisible clocks and their modern masters, subscribe. Activate the notification bell, for the ticking is constant and designed to keep you from hearing your own thoughts. Share this with one other person who you know feels the rushing, who feels their time slipping away. They have convinced you that the speed of the world is progress. We are here to show you that it is a harvest, and to teach you the profound, rebellious power of standing still.